You are listening to the enhanced version of the Jeff Rubin Show is the kind of sentence I would say if this episode had pictures in it. It does not. I know last week's episode didn't either. Neither of them just really fit the theme. This one's all about words, not pictures. I think you'll enjoy it anyway. It's one of my favorite episodes yet. You do not have to have watched Game of Thrones at all to enjoy this episode. It is spoiler-free, so you can go catch up on it later. Enjoy. Welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and today I am very excited to be joined by David Peterson, president of the Language Creation Society and creator of the Dothraki language from Game of Thrones. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Great to be here.
A little background for those who haven't watched Game of Thrones, because I think this is something that even those who aren't familiar with the franchise would find interesting. The Dothraki are a people. This is not the part they're going to find interesting. They're going to find what you talk about interesting. The Dothraki are a people. They're barbaric. They're horse worshippers. Would you say that's a fair description?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And they're kind of off in their own corner of the world for most of the story, and they're speaking their own language, Dothraki, and it's usually subtitled unless you can tell what someone's saying just by the context. And David, you created that language.
That's right.
How did you get the opportunity to create the Dothraki language?
Well, what happened was the producers of Game of Thrones went to the Language Creation Society. At the time, there was another president named Sai, and they said, we're looking for a language. We're looking for the Dothraki language for this show. And so what he did was he set up a kind of basically a competitive application process and advertised it, all over the internet to all the various language creation communities. Just those that there's a couple of forums online. There's a mailing list. There's also mailing lists dedicated specifically to Tolkien's languages, specifically to Klingon, and things like that. And he said we need, really kind of in basic terms, because we were covered by an NDA, but he said we need a language for a TV show. If you're interested, please apply. So then all of us signed our NDAs, discovered what the project was, and then after that, it was like 2 months of basically creating what we thought the Dothraki language should look like. It was extremely intense.
Can you talk a little bit about that process? How exactly was it run?
It was a 2-round process, a 2-round double-blind process. So what happened was there were reviewers that were also well-respected conlangers within the community.
Whoa, conlangers. What's a conlanger?
Conlanger. Conlang is short for constructed language, and then a conlang is a constructed language, and a constructed language is what we call a created language. It kind of the term came up because they needed a short word for an email listserv, and so they just shortened the word constructed language and created conlang at lists.brown.edu or listserv.brown.edu, and that became the kind of first and oldest language creation community on the internet. So anyway, that's what a conlanger is, and we kind of just, it's our term now. It's the word for better or worse. So it was a 2-round process, and we had, as I said, some well-respected conlangers, language creators, as judges. And what happened was, for the first round, we basically there wasn't a lot of there weren't a lot of rules. It was just there was some kind of an idea of some of the types of things we would be translating, and so we needed to give examples of that, and then any other information we wanted to give, as well as signing an NDA saying that we would be willing to do blah 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 and all this stuff. And so there were about, at one point, I think there were as many as 40 people interested. That kind of got whittled down to around 30 that submitted an application for the first round. And that went to the reviewers, who then came up with a series, came up with 5 finalists. And then after that, there was kind of, and that whole process lasted about a month. Then there was another month-long process where the 5 finalists, and I was among those finalists, went back and expanded on and revised everything that we had, partly based on the comments that we received from the reviewers. And then those 5 applications, or actually 4, one of the 5 finalists dropped out. Those 4 applications were sent on to the producers, and they decided which one to go with, and they decided on mine.
So before I want to get back to Dothraki, but it seems like before that, how did you get involved in creating languages in the first place?
All right. When I was in high school, Actually, when I was a junior in high school, I kind of woke up one morning. It was literally, I woke up one morning and I felt kind of very ashamed and very upset that there were millions of people all over the world who could speak French and that I was not one of them. And it just really kind of happened out of the blue. I felt like I was being left out. And so I decided then, I made it my goal to learn every single language on the face of the planet. I didn't get too far with that, but at that time I kind of had this desire to just start learning languages. So I started learning French and Latin on my own, and I took German in high school. In addition, I'd already been taking Spanish, and I already spoke Spanish. And then when I got to college, I took Arabic and Russian and Esperanto. This was just in my first year.
You can speak all of these languages?
To varying degrees, indeed.
So we were opposite students. Foreign languages I always had difficulty with. I could never get my mind around them. It was always my worst subject. But you just, it seems like maybe it came naturally to you. Is that fair to say?
Oh, no. Listen. And if anybody else is going to be going to college, pay heed to these words. This is the best part. Foreign languages, at least, okay, admittedly, some people are going to be better than others, but honestly, foreign languages are a pretty easy A. And here's how it worked at Berkeley. Foreign language classes were mostly 5 days a week. And so for them, you got 5 units. Most like heavy hitting classes were 4 units, some were even 3. So you could actually fill up your non-major GPA with all of these units of A just by taking introductory language classes. And you got to learn a language. It was like the best thing in the world. But yeah, so I just filled up on as many as I possibly could, and I didn't take as many as I wanted because I had 2 other majors that got in the way. But I tried my best to take as many as I could, and so yeah, now I can speak a little bit to varying degrees with various languages. In Arabic, I can mainly say things like "Ashur bil wihda," which is I feel lonely, or "Anna mutarjim bil ummim al mutahhira," which is I am a translator at the United Nations. These are kind of the basic things you learn, I guess, when you learn Arabic.
What languages, if you're fluent, like what languages could you travel to that country and not be totally lost in? What languages, I don't know, can you speak is the way to say it, but what languages are you at least competent in?
Spanish.
Just and English. I mean, we're doing that now.
Theoretically, yeah. So yes, English and Spanish. Beyond that, if I had a couple of weeks, I could get up to speed with something like German and French pretty easily. And I could, and then maybe with like a month, I could get enough Arabic and Russian to kind of fly in there. But especially with Arabic, the thing is most of the time they teach you Quranic Arabic, which nobody speaks now. So learning to speak the Arabic that's actually spoken in any given country that you're going to be going to is really kind of like a whole different experience.
So you got into learning languages. You found this passion for studying languages, learning them. When did you turn that corner and said, this isn't enough, I want to start creating them?
Okay, so I think I probably initially got the idea. It was based on my experience with learning Esperanto. Esperanto was a created language that was created.
A conlang.
Yes, it is a conlang that was created in 1887 to facilitate international communication. And, you know, we still have that problem, but Esperanto is still around today, and there are people who speak it. It's, I think, by far the most successful created language in history.
So Esperanto was created as an artificial language explicitly for the idea of fostering communications between different countries, so we wouldn't all have to learn each other's language, we could all just learn Esperanto.
That was the idea, yeah.
Didn't go so well, but it is still around. It does have something of a legacy I know about.
Yeah, and I think rather than, if you look at it from the point of view as it was supposed to solve the problem of international communication and foster in world peace, maybe it failed there, you know, perhaps. But if you just look at it as it's a language that people can learn and they can talk to each other in it, and and maybe it fosters a community, I'd say it's been a resounding success because the community still exists. There are people that speak to each other in Esperanto as basically their basic form of communication, even if they have another language. So, you know, I know a bunch of Esperanto speakers, and they're all quite happy with it. So,
Have you ever seen the William Shatner movie that's in Esperanto? Because that's pretty much the main thing I know about the language is that William Shatner once made a movie
I
of
have
it.
never seen Incubus. I would like to see it one of these days. I hear it's awful, but not only that, I hear that the Esperanto is also bad. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
so I mean, it's like they went to all the trouble of translating all the dialogue into Esperanto and wanted to use it, but I mean, it just Esperanto speakers can listen to it and kind of laugh at basically how bad it is.
I
So
wonder if that was Shatner's fault.
well, probably.
So Esperanto inspired you to look into this world of constructed languages and kind of open your eyes to that?
Well, this is how it worked. I was taking Esperanto, so I knew that people had created languages for international communication. And there had been several attempts in addition to Esperanto. I was also taking several other languages at the time, which I found quite interesting, especially Arabic, which I fell in love with. And then I was also taking my very first linguistics class. And I thought during one of my linguistics classes, what if I created a language not for international communication, but for my own personal use, just for fun? And after I had that idea, I started immediately kind of scribbling notes in my notebook rather than listening to a lecture. And I think the very first thing I started doing was creating a writing system that was largely influenced by Arabic's writing system, which I also just loved. And so from there, I kind of actually thought at the time, and I did think for several weeks, that I was the first person to ever have hit on this idea that somebody could create a language just for fun. It was then later that I discovered, when I was doing a search on the internet, that I discovered the online conlanging community and discovered that, wow, not only was I not the first one to come up with this idea, hundreds and thousands of people throughout history have also hit upon this idea and are doing it right now, including Tolkien, which I didn't know at the time. I had no idea that Tolkien had invented languages. I knew what Lord of the Rings was, I knew what Tolkien was, but I didn't know that part.
So Tolkien created Elvish. What languages are there in Lord of the Rings besides Elvish?
Okay, so Tolkien, what he did was created a language family. And so it's kind of like to say that he created the Elvish language. What he did was he created what we call a proto-language in linguistics. To give you an example of what that is, Latin could be considered the proto-language for Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese. It was basically the language that those languages descended from Latin. So he created a proto-language, and from that evolved dozens of languages, some of which weren't really fleshed out. Some of the most fleshed out ones are like Sindarin and Quenya.
Which is Elvish, I believe, correct?
Yes, and Quenya, which is a different type of Elvish. But then
I feel like I just insulted the elves, like when someone's just like, that's just Chinese when they see Asian writing, that I didn't know that there was different dialects of elf.
It is extremely insulting amongst the right community. But no. But of course, I'm sure they're used to it because that's what you get. Everybody asks, oh, Tolkien, so he invented Elvish. And then they all kind of roll their eyes to themselves and then say, well, actually, and so it goes on like that.
Do you know any Elvish? Do you know any Klingon?
I know the word Ardalambion in, I think, Sindarin because that's the name of the primary Tolkien language site.
So, did you ever try learning those?
No, I also didn't know that Klingon was a language either for some time. Somehow this had just missed me.
What kind of nerd are you? You didn't know Klingon was a language.
Exactly. No, I came to nerdhood very late, as it were. But
then you fully embraced it.
Yeah, I kind of just fell right in, and I've been falling ever since. Haven't hit bottom yet.
What is the Language Creation Society?
The Language Creation Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's dedicated to kind of two purposes. One, to promoting conlanging, just to let people in the outside world know, hey, this thing exists, and it's pretty cool. And then also to serving the language creation community that exists. So, like, for example, we have a free hosting thing from free hosting package from DreamHost. And so we give free web space to community projects. that are of interest to the conlang community. And so we kind of do those two things mainly.
All right, let's get back into Game of Thrones. So you're creating Dothraki, you're writing a language. How do you even begin to create a language? Are you just like, I don't know, dog? I guess that's Blaka. All right, now what's cat?
Some of it, sometimes some of it is actually that way. All right, it's kind of two different questions. First, how I began the Dothraki language and how one begins a language.
All right, so let's take it generally first. Then we're really going to get into Game of Thrones, though. Generally, how does one, what are like the first steps? Where do you start?
Okay, well, the important thing to take away is that different people do things differently. I do things in a particular way that I think also other people do, a lot of conlangers do, which is generally first, before you get into any of it, you have to have some idea or some goal of like, why am I doing this? Especially at the point where we're at now, where everybody knows about language creation and things like that, you have to have some sort of an idea of what you want to accomplish with this language. Maybe you want to employ an interesting conjugation system that you saw like half of in one language, or an interesting declension pattern, or maybe an interesting phonological phenomenon. So you get those goals in mind first. And then what I do is I work on the sound system first, and I kind of get that set. Then I move on to morphology, which are things like inflectional affixes on verbs or nouns, and then kind of go back and forth between that and the phonology. Then I usually move on to other more sentential elements, adverbs, adpositions, things like that. And then you kind of get to the lexicon, and the lexicon is the fun part where you spend years taking it from one word to thousands of words.
So before you start defining the words, you got to take a step back and be like, how do these all fit together? What kind of, I don't know, pieces of words do they use?
Yeah, and so to give a very small example that I think English speakers will be familiar with, just think about plurals in nouns. So in English, we have one basic pluralization pattern. So you have cat, cats, or dogs, dog, dogs, bush, bushes. That's the simple one. But then we have a whole bunch of other stuff that comes into play, like goose, geese, ox, oxen, fish, fish, cactus, cacti, and even with like something like octopus, where you have octopus, octopuses, but then some people say octopi, and this crazy one, octopodes from Greek. So inventing a kind of a small corner like that, you kind of start with one word type, a noun or a verb, and think, what are the possibilities here? What do I want to do? And then how can I do it? So in Arabic, for example, it's not just a matter of singular and plural for nouns. There's also a dual. So you have a special suffix that you add to a noun to mean two of something. So one book is kitab. Many books, three or more books, is kutub. But exactly two books is kitaban. And, it's just kind of a different way of doing things. And so those are kind of like all the questions you have to think about as you approach your own language.
So how do you answer those questions? So like, let's take the Dothraki, for example. How did you, what were your goals in creating the Dothraki language?
Okay, first, my major goal was the Dothraki language as it existed before, I added all the stuff to it.
Because your work is based on what was in the original books that the HBO show is based on.
Right. So the only extant Dothraki that was in there was from mainly books 1 through 3 of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin.
And I feel like we should explain that A Song of Ice and Fire was the name of the book series that Game of Thrones is based on. They renamed the TV show Game of Thrones, but the book is The Song of Ice and Fire series.
Yes. Okay.
All right. We're all on the same page now. Keep going.
All right. So there were a whole bunch of words and names in these books that were from the Dothraki language, which in the real world at the time didn't actually exist, but in the fictional world does exist as a full language. So what that means is that all of the words that are in there are representatives from this fictional language, which I now have to create in the real world. So my top #1 overall goal was to make it so that the language would look to the fans of the book series like it made sense with everything that was already in there. That it looked like the words that were in there could have been plucked from the language I created. And so in order to do that, first I had to kind of analyze everything that was in the books. And so we got together a list. It was Jim Henry's a fantastic conlanger. He was the one who actually came up with the list of every word, phrase, and name that is used, that's of Dothraki origin, that's used in the books.
How many words were there? What were you working with here?
It actually wasn't very many. It was like 30 or so. Most of them were names. But even so, names tell you something, a little bit about structure, at least the structure of names, and they also tell you about the sound system of the language. So what I first had to do was look at those words as they're spelled in the Roman alphabet in the books and decide, and actually this is what I did. There was kind of a two-pronged thing here. First, how did I think George R.R. Martin imagined that these were pronounced? And how would the average English speaker reading these books, since the books were written originally in English, how would they imagine that they were pronounced? Once I came up with that analysis, then it was a matter of extrapolating from that what the sound system was and what the sound system could be. And then kind of when I had that settled down, I went back and looked at the few phrases that there were and tried to analyze, okay, what is the structure here? What could the structure be? Kind of like what could I get away with changing and what would make absolutely no sense to change? And so that was kind of like how I approached it. Another goal that I had in mind when also creating words and creating things like that was I didn't want it to be too difficult for the actors to pronounce and to kind of get a hold of. And so one of the things I thought that would be difficult was a lot of stem internal changes.
You're going to have to explain what that means.
And I will. One example of a stem internal change, the singular for something you stab somebody with in English is knife. The plural is knives. So the F becomes a V. And that's kind of a stem internal change because if you just look...
Okay, I get it. I get what that means, yeah.
So you look at it and you think it should be knives, like Toronto Maple Leafs, which drives me crazy, by the way. I say Maple Leafs in my own private bedroom. But anyway, so I decided that would be a little bit too difficult, so I thought that's not where the complexity of the language should be. And also, I was thinking of... I was also thinking of potential fans of the language and what areas could be complex without putting people off and what areas could be complex without putting people off. And so I kind of like kept that all in mind as I was designing both the sound system and the language system.
I love that you had the fanboys who were going to take the next step and really learn the language in mind when you were creating it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's such a huge following just for the book series. And then
yeah, and it's exploded. I mean, I wasn't really a fan of this. I mean, I don't know. I'm guarding it with a really. I had no idea. I was not a fan of the series at all before the TV show came out. Were you? Were you familiar with the books when this assignment was proposed?
I was familiar. I hadn't read them yet, but it's kind of like my wife, who's down there listening right now and being very quiet. She was a huge fan of science fiction and fantasy, and she had read the series, and then also. Anytime that basically if you read fantasy, you know who George R.R. Martin is and you know what A Song of Ice and Fire is. It's really huge.
You mentioned that you weren't sure how George R.R. Martin pronounced some of the words. Did you ever get a chance to ask him? Have you spoken to him about the language that you created?
Oh yeah, no. In fact, you can't help but notice the differences anytime he says the word Dothraki, for example. This was something that I learned the first time I met him, in fact, which is at a signing and a reading that he did in San Diego.
Which is where you are, right?
I'm now in Orange County.
Okay.
Behind the orange curtain. So the first thing I noticed about him, because he talked to me, he said to me pretty much exactly like this, so you're the Dothraki guy.
Said, oh, what? Interesting. And then, is that after you created the language?
Oh yeah, no.
So all the work's been done, and you don't. Even the name of the language is not correct, or not what he had imagined.
Apparently not. I think he might.
And is this before the TV show started filming? Before it aired?
I'd have to think about that. I can't remember. No, I don't think it was before it had filmed anything. I think they had filmed a little bit, but I think he might be like one of the only people on the planet that pronounces it that way.
Yeah, I never even considered. I thought maybe kind of throw a little fanciness into the R, like Dothraki, like, you know, because there's that apostrophe there. I considered that. It seemed just a little salty for me. But Dothraki, I never even considered.
Yeah, and he consistently pronounces it that way. But
even still,
yeah, oh, still, absolutely.
Because it's Dothraki on the TV show.
It is. No, but he still says Dothraki. But one of the great things about George R. R. Martin is he's invented. It's kind of hard to distinguish between these two, but he's invented a lot of fictional languages within the series. They're not actually languages, but they exist as in the fictional universe, right? And there are a lot of fictional cultures and peoples that he's invented, and included with that are a whole bunch of different kinds of names. But he's actually stated several times, because everybody's always coming to him, how do you pronounce this name? How do you pronounce this name? Even if you look at some of the ordinary names from Westeros.
Yeah, they all have a weird twist, like Eddard.
Yeah.
As opposed to Edward, or he just can't have a normal name.
Right, and Peter with a Y instead of an E. And so everybody was always coming to him saying, how do you pronounce these things? And he's always said, it doesn't matter to me how the fans pronounce any of the names or the words that appear in the series. What I consider is important is, you know, the story, the character development, pronounce the names how you want. So
that's interesting. And we've talked about this before on this show, how, like, when I first read the Harry Potter books before the movie came out, I was just like, Hermione did this, Hermione did that. I didn't even consider Hermione.
Oh yeah, gosh, that always happens. You know, that would happen to me, especially before I took Russian. When I was reading Russian books, I would often see a name and just kind of like say in my head, oh, the name that starts with R. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that in my head.
I do that a lot, sure. Is there anything about the Dothraki culture that George R. R. Martin created that informed the way you put the language together?
Oh, absolutely. Language and culture go hand in hand. One can't really do without the other. I mean, so one approach that could have been taken, that somebody could have taken with this language, is first taken all the extant vocabulary and made sure that was in the language, but then just using kind of an algorithm or a program to basically generate a whole bunch, like thousands and thousands of words of vocabulary. So it's like, you know, just with the English dictionary, for example. So it'll become like the word for this is now this, the word for this is that, right on down the line. You know, and there are certain extents to which, you know, it might be useful to do that. One of the things that I find useful to automate myself are sound changes that occur over thousands of years to make sure that you're not making any mistakes. But if you do it that way, you end up inadvertently borrowing in a lot of culture that's unintended, and you end up making a lot of assumptions in the language that perhaps one shouldn't make. So, for example, if one were to ask me what the word for book is in Dothraki, I would say there is no word for book as of yet. And the reason is culturally dependent. It's mentioned specifically in the books that the Dothraki have no written form for their language. It's just a spoken language. They don't have writing themselves. If you just coin a word for book and say, this is the Dothraki word for book, and it goes back to who knows how many years, it implies first that the Dothraki have some sort of printing process. They have some sort of regular interaction with books and value them to a certain extent that they would produce them. It implies that perhaps they have some form of writing, something to put inside of books. It implies that they have invented paper or something close to paper that you could include inside of books, that perhaps there's scholarship, that there's publishing. It brings along with it all of this cultural baggage that is just automatically assumed simply by coining a word for book. And so all of that you have to absolutely keep in mind when coining words for a language. So, you know, as a result, there's no word for book in Dothraki. There's no word for cell phone tower. There's no word for redistricting and things like that.
It's kind of like how the Spanish don't have a word for hockey. I actually noticed this because I was watching some Dothraki scenes to prepare for this interview, and there's one scene where Khal Drogo is talking, and he refers to becoming the king in the world of Game of Thrones, a lot of people refer to it as the Iron Throne. You sit upon the Iron Throne. And I noticed that Khal Drogo, who is a leader of the Dothraki, I'm like, I don't even he's not a leader, he's a Khal. I can't really get into it right now. But while he's describing becoming their leader, he says he wants to sit upon the Iron Chair as opposed to the Iron Throne. And I was wondering if that was a deliberate decision.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no, I mean, the very idea of a throne and having a special word for it indicates, first of all, that there is an entire tradition of, first of all, a particular type of leadership, usually located within a single place, right? Which is not the case with a Khal from the Dothraki. They ride around, they're nomadic, they come back to a city, but it's not like any of the Khals go there and sit upon some throne and say, I am the leader of all the Dothraki. It just doesn't make sense. But then not only that, it's a particular, the reason that they have this distinction is because it's a very special kind of chair that's, very ornate, very fancy, or melted down from the swords of enemies, as the case with the Iron Throne. And so it just wouldn't make any sense to have some sort of equivalent term like that in Dothraki. They have seats, though, and so that's what you get. The word essentially that they use for seat or chair is the same word for throne, because there's not really any distinction.
Are there any other examples of that from the TV show that you can think of, places where you had to hold back and think, they don't have a word for this?
Well, actually, one early thing was, and I think this was actually from the pilot initially, I got a request, and they were saying, because one of the things that the Dothraki do is the Dothraki men is they kind of gamble based on, guys fighting each other or whose horse can race the fastest or things like that. It's kind of a leisure activity. And so one of the initial requests I got was, can you translate, like, I bet you 3 gold coins that he will win, or something like that. And so I looked at that and I thought about it, and I emailed him back and I said, I think we might have to rethink this, because one of the issues with the Dothraki is that they don't participate in trade at all.
Yeah, they don't really seem to have an economy.
Yeah, they don't have money. Basically what they do is they go around en masse to the various cities that dot the Dothraki Sea, and they take what they want, and if they respect somebody, they give them a gift. But it's not the case that they're trading for it, and they certainly wouldn't have any use for something like money. And so the entire concept didn't really make sense. And so then, when I said that, they said, oh, right, of course that makes sense. And we just kind of recast that. And I translated something different that ultimately I don't think it actually made it in. It might have been in the post-production somewhere. You might hear in the background.
Did you ever talk to any of the actors who speak Dothraki, like Jason Momoa? I hope I'm saying that word right. It's an English word. He was Khal Drogo, or there was Emilia Clarke who was Daenerys. Did you ever work with them at all?
Momoa is a Hawaiian word.
Oh, so I can't. Not my fault.
But actually, I still haven't spoken to any of them. But it's kind of the wonders of the internet age.
Have you communicated with them?
Well. In a one-way sort of fashion.
That's more of the wonders of like TV production than the internet.
Well,
but those guys, they're both. I think two. First of all, the show is full of great performances. Yeah. It won. Peter Dinklage obviously won an Emmy, right. But everyone is great on that show, and I think those two particularly were incredible throughout the season, speaking this completely made up language.
Well, I recorded every single line.
Oh, interesting. So they learned it phonetically.
Yeah.
Jason Momoa doesn't speak Dothraki.
Yeah, he probably has learned some stuff since then, because you can look at the lines and look at the MP3 and figure some stuff out.
I mean, the scene. Well, that's because he puts like an inflection in it. It's really the scene, which I think is actually the scene where he talks about the Iron Chair. I don't want to get too spoilery because thus far we've avoided it. But it's Khal Drogo has this big monologue. It's towards the end of the season where I don't think it's too spoilery to say he's talking about war. Right. And it's like a 90-second monologue in this completely made-up language that you created. And I think it's one of the best scenes of the first season of that show.
He blew the doors off with that performance. And I was really interested in what was going to happen with that specifically, because first I knew it was coming, because by the time I was actually working on the show, I'd read all the books. So I knew that this speech was coming. In the books, it's in English because you can only demand so much from a reader. So I knew it was coming, and then I got an email. It's like, okay, we've come to the really big speech. This is what we have for it, and we're wondering if you could get to it earlier, than I had been. Usually I had like a 2-week window to get stuff back, because Jason wants some time to mull over it. And so I thought, all right. So first I translated it, and that was some work. But then I got to recording it, and I'd gotten pretty good at recording Dothraki up to this point. I kind of really developed my own way of speaking it. I was pretty good. Even that, like the first time through, and it's like I get through the first sentence and I screw up, and I'm like, this is going to take a while, isn't it? And it took me about 45 minutes just to record the MP3 myself. And I just thought to myself, he's going to have to do this basically live. What is he going to do? And so I sent it on, and in interviews, he talked about this. He says he got it, and so you can just look at the translation and see just a wall of text. And then you listen to the MP3, which itself is quite long. And so he says what he did was he just ordered a pizza and got himself some beer, went to his hotel room, and just spent the entire night memorizing and kind of mimicking, reproducing it, just learning it. And then, of course, adding his own inflection, because that's what all the actors did. They had to, learn the very basics of how it was pronounced, but then, they had to add their own emotion, their own
This
feeling.
is exactly how I did my bar mitzvah portion. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying that I thought the result was incredible, just incredible.
I'm surprised he doesn't know the language, because in that scene, like, it feels like he does in that performance.
Yeah.
That scene's almost like the starring scene. That's kind of your spotlight of the season, I think. Because there's a lot of Dothraki, but that's really where the Dothraki language is just like a wall-to-wall, this really passionate scene. And that seems like the biggest scene for the language.
Oh, man, and when I saw it...
Thus far.
Yeah, when I saw it live, I was just smiling ear to ear. It was like, good God, it's awesome.
Have you worked on season 2 of the show?
Yeah, I'm done. I mean...
Oh, yeah, I mean, it starts airing in a month or two, so you must be done with it. Oh my God, that's so exciting. Even though I know what happens because I've read the books, and I'm not going to talk about it, but that's still, that's really exciting that you've worked on that and that's done. Are you thinking about season 3 at all?
We will think about season 3 when we come to it.
I understand. It seems like this is so far, like thinking about that scene, it's so far past, like going back to like, I don't know, the Twilight Zone, which is a great show, not to pick on it, but when you have aliens that are just like, meep mop, meep will bop. And this is so far beyond that. Has this ever been done on a TV show before? There's Klingon, but I think Klingon was
for the movies, yeah.
Klingon was for the movies, yeah.
But actually after the movies, because it was for the original Star Trek movies, right? The ones with the original cast. They did include it a lot in the Next Generation, and then also in bits and pieces in Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
That's true, but they already had it. The idea of starting a TV show and creating a language for a TV show seems maybe unprecedented. Do you know of anyone else that's done it?
Actually, there are 2 examples that I can think of off the top of my head. There might be more, but like 2 actually fuller examples. One of them, and this one surprised me because when I was 3 and 4 years old, I watched this show religiously. There was a language in Land of the Lost.
The original, like, 60s version?
No, 80s version.
Oh, like the newer one where it was with, like, I don't know, it had that great intro.
Is that the newer one? The one when I was 3 years old was the newer one?
I don't know. How old are you?
I'm 31.
I think the one when you were a kid, I mean, I think the older one's been in reruns for a while. The older one is, like, almost on an empty stage. It's Sid and Marty Krofft. It's crazy. The newer one, I think, is just kind of like... I think it's more 90s-y,
okay.
Not necessarily, maybe early 90s, but just like when I think about it, it's got like bad special effects and stuff. The 60s one's almost on like an empty stage. It's crazy.
Okay, I will need to look this up.
It might not be 60s. It might be 70s. I'm not totally sure.
Or it might be late 70s, early 80s. We have to look this up.
I'll look it up. I'll put it at the end of the show. I'll inform everyone what's correct.
Anyway, so there was a language in some incarnation of this show. We're not going to say when yet, but at some incarnation of this show, that was before now, there was a language that was created.
Either way, it was like a kid show, like,
it was
like a Saturday morning type thing in either incarnation.
It was called Pakuni, and it was created by Victoria Fromkin, who was a linguist. She's passed on now. She was a linguist at UCLA. and they wanted her to create a language for the show for the. And you have to understand, I was 3 and 4 at the time. I don't know the names of these people. I just saw it, but there were some sort of bad humanoid people. It was for them, or maybe it was like ape-like people. Anyway,
was it the Slee Stack perhaps?
There you go.
The Slee Stack's a
yes.
thing, but they're like reptilian.
Yeah, I think it was that. It was called the Pakuni language. You can look it up. It was created by Victoria Fromkin. Then later, this was kind of this was after X-Files, I believe. There was a short-run television show on NBC called Dark Skies. And for this, they actually worked with a language creator named Matt Pearson, who was a student of Victoria Fromkin's at UCLA. He was a graduate student at the time. And they needed an alien language for that television show. It was called the Hive language for Dark Skies. I think they produced a full season of it, but then the show was canceled, and nobody really remembers it. But it happened. And I happen to know Matt Pearson. He's created a tremendous language, one of the best languages I think we have amongst the community, called now Okuna. And he's just and he's a really nice guy. I met him while I was up at Berkeley.
So even if this isn't totally new that they're creating a language for show, I still get the sense that there's more of this going on. People are taking this more seriously. I know they're doing it for John Carter of Mars. The Martians have a language. The aliens in Avatar have a language. Do you see that in the community? Are you seeing more people getting interested in it?
Oh, yeah. The interest has just exploded. And from all sorts of different sources to the point where it's almost like we don't even really know how to deal with it. Before, I mean, even in the 90s, when people were kind of just discovering the internet, all the way up until like 2003 or 4, the language creation community was rather insular. I'd say as late as 2004, if there was somebody who created a language and they had something about it on the internet, I knew who they were, oftentimes personally. And then it's like now it's exploded. Like for Navi, for Avatar, they have a community, just a fan community, just for the language. It's over 5,000 people large.
Wow.
And these people aren't, most of them are not language creators. Some of them are, but most of them are not. They're just people that are interested. And, personally, I think it's a good step for things like television shows and things like movies, because having an authentic language it's different from just having a prop. Because, for example, in Game of Thrones, the massive wall of ice, the Iron Throne, those are fake in the sense that if you've ever sat on the Iron Throne that's been traveling around, it's kind of made out of plastic or whatever. It's not actually made out of hammered swords. I mean, it'd be awful. But it looks real on the show. The problem with a language, if it's going to be spoken on a television show or in a movie, the audience can actually take a hold of it, in a sense. It's like all that a language is basically, it's spoken or it's written form. So if you hear a language spoken, anybody can take it and deconstruct it and figure out, is this authentic? Is this real? Is this work? Is this gibberish? And it's really easy to figure out. Whereas for something like the Iron Throne or the great big wall of ice, if it looks good on the screen, that's the end of it.
Okay, but let me ask you this. If the Dothraki speak Dothraki, how come everyone else in the magical kingdom of Westeros speaks English?
Okay, so the Westerosi speak Common, shall we say. And Common is, in the fictional universe, it's supposed to be descended from, I think, the old tongue. But I think there was a point at which George R.R. Martin just had to say, put his foot down and say, these guys speak English. We're going to call it Common, but it's English. Whereas like the other languages that exist even in the book series, the understanding is that he's translating for us. That they're actually speaking a different language and he's just translating. Or, he'll just paraphrase and he said blah, 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 blah in X language.
As long as someone's thought about it, I'm happy. I don't care exactly what the explanation is. I just want to know that someone was worried about it.
Yeah, and of course, it's one of those things where people that are interested in language, anytime they watch a movie or see a TV show or read a book where anything like this could happen, it always comes to mind. It's always like, well, why is it like that? And it was like, or how could that word possibly be descended from Latin, in a world where Rome doesn't exist, and so on.
I have to ask this. This is like my Jeff Rubin Show T-shirt slogan. This is my catchphrase. Is this your full-time job? Is this what you do?
For the time being, it is.
That's awesome. Very few people are able to turn their passion into their job, so I think that's great.
Yeah, and it is. It can be a lot of pressure sometimes, but it is just so much fun. To me, there's nothing more intellectually rigorous than creating a realistic, authentic language.
Can I ask you to say some things in Dothraki?
Yeah, sure.
How would you say, "My, that's a lovely dress" in Dothraki?
Are you kidding me? There's no word for dress in Dothraki.
What would be the equivalent? How would they handle that situation?
All right, give me a give me a second to find the word here that I want.
What are you consulting right now? What are you typing at?
I'm consulting my personal dictionary here.
Okay. How do you keep that file? What do language creators use to keep a dictionary?
Everybody uses different things. Lots of people use like an Excel spreadsheet. I've never liked that. I've liked the look. I like something to look exactly like a dictionary. And so I use just basically, well, it's not a Word document per se because I use the Mac program Pages. So it's a Pages document. And I printed it out once at one point in time. So there exists a print Dothraki grammar over on my shelf because I did an interview. I did a television kind of little documentary style interview for HBO, and they were hoping to have a prop. And so I printed out my dictionary to that point and kind of bound it at Staples. So that was fun. Okay, so yeah. And then I think I want, and said only a banana in nouns, right? Sorry, but yeah, I think I got it here. So that's kind of like this would be, that's a lovely dress. It'd be Haz Khogar Lain.
Interesting. Kind of still not really, doesn't sound very complimentary.
Yeah, Khogar is actually, there's a funny story behind that. So Khogar is just a word that means whatever you're wearing at the time. So you could translate it as garb, one's dress, one's suit, or one's clothing, if just what one's wearing. So that's probably what you would use. And this word comes from a friend of mine, John Moore. We had this nickname for him in high school. We called him Jugar, from the Spanish verb jugar, because he would come over to my house after school and say, "Hey guys, you want to jugar some all basketball?" That's just just a joking way of saying you want to play some basketball. So I decided to drop his nickname in as a word, and so his nickname became the word for garb or dress, because I happened to need a word for that at the time.
I thought it was based on Hogar, the character, who only speaks by saying his name, Hogar.
Oh, Hodor. That's Hodor.
Hodor. Are there any other Easter eggs like that within the Dothraki language?
Oh, sure. Like the word for good and kind is the word. It's my wife's name, Erin. So Erin. And then there.
I hope she's still listening.
Oh, she is. Yeah. And so I won't tell you about the other ones. No, no, I'm kidding. But I also have a nickname for her. I call her Duck, and so the word for duck in this is her middle name, Allegra, which is Allegra.
That's very sweet.
And then there are some other fun ones. I remember there was this kind of like fake feud going on between George R. R. Martin and the creator of Lost, where George.
Well, I can't get in the middle of that fight. I don't want to take a side there.
Yeah, well, just for fun, I guess, all in the interest of fun. So the root lost, L-O-S-T, means disappointed.
Ah, that's so sad. I don't. If we start talking about Lost and the finale of Lost, we're gonna be here all day. We can't do that.
Yeah, let's.
Let me run this one by you. How would you say one ring to rule them all?
Oh, okay. Okay. Give me a second.
Sure.
oh crap, I looked up the word govern, and of course all I'm getting is all of these grammatical things, like the governed noun is in the nominative case, the governed noun is in the ablative case. Oh my goodness, I don't think I have a word for to rule. It's kind of a strange concept. If you think about, or at least if you think about the Dothraki, and the way, Khalasar is, they don't really rule per se. It's kind of like they direct. They drive. Oh, I got it. Hold on. I thought of a synonym. Okay. All right. Oh, shoot. What's the word for one? Okay, I've forgotten the word for one. All right. I will get this. I will tell you when I'm ready.
Do you mind? This is amazing. Do you mind if I ask my people on Twitter? I'm just gonna say we're talking and ask them if they have any suggestions.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let's see what they come up with.
Okay, got it. That's actually kind of an interesting construction. I never thought of doing it this way. But okay, one ring to rule them all. Atfiri hadrogat eyak.
Wow! And so, one nerd somewhere begins construction of the Elvish to Dothraki dictionary.
Oh, that'd be fun. Oh man. So it's one thing that I think the only real dictionary we have in print form, aside from Esperanto, is Klingon. Mark Okren convinced them to put out a Klingon dictionary at one point. It would be wild, unbelievably imaginable to see a print dictionary from one conlang to another conlang.
Is there any talk about putting out a Dothraki dictionary? People can learn the language online.
Yes, they can. And I would say if there is interest in a Dothraki dictionary, I would certainly be available to do so. Actually, probably wouldn't be that much work on my part. So I think there's probably fan interest. Now all we need to do is convince a publisher that there is interest enough to warrant publishing a book. I think that would be nice myself.
All right, I'm getting a ton of suggestions over Twitter.
Okay.
Here's a good one. Nintendo25 wants to know what you talking about Willis. How would you say what you talking about Willis in Dothraki?
For a minute,
I'm assuming there's no Willis in the existing dictionary, so we might have to get creative.
No, and actually that's a fun one because you can't begin a word with a W in Dothraki. But actually, with words that get borrowed in that start with a W, they just begin with an O. So, what? Okay, about. Okay. Just 1 second. I can get this. I think it's glissy. Okay, This is one of those interesting ones.
What makes this interesting? What makes this one interesting? What makes that last one interesting?
Okay, so in English we have it's considered antiquated now, but let's say you wanted to. So we could say, if we want to just break it down, you could say, "What are you talking about, Willis?" But you could also say, "About what are you talking, Willis?" All right. That the thing that we can do in English that's so nice is we can strand prepositions at the end. So we can say, "What are you talking about? Where are you going to?" We don't have to say, "To where are you going?" any longer. In Dothraki, what you actually do is you strand the preposition, but you put it in a special form. So it'd be kind of like saying, "I spoke there to stand for I spoke to him." So like in the way that you would need to do this would be, "What are you talking there about?" However, this preposition is a newer preposition. It was derived very recently from another word meaning nearby. And so it doesn't have that special form. And so we have to translate it in kind of a roundabout way, which is nominative. Let's see. All right, you ready?
Yeah, hit me.
All right, what you're talking about, Will, is
Wow, that's so much better than I thought it could possibly be. That was incredible.
Oh, it's fun. That was another show from my childhood. I watched like every episode.
Here's a Game of Thrones themed one. Orange Tory asked, "Winter is coming." How do you say "winter is coming" in Dothraki?
Ahiskejada.
So that one exists. That we already know.
Oh yeah, of course you had to translate that one. That was one of the ones I translated myself.
All right, so this one could be fun. Justin on Facebook, I spread this to Facebook too because this is way too fun.
Cool.
Justin on Facebook, common question. You find yourself, you get lost in Dothraki territory. You want to know, where is the bathroom?
Bathroom. Okay. I know how I want to translate that. Just give me a second. Okay, here we go. So, where is the bathroom? I would translate that this way. Finne anhallas navik. And that means, where can I piss?
Amazing. This could go on forever. How can people learn Dothraki on themselves? Where are these resources online?
Okay, well, there are a couple of resources. One, there's a small but burgeoning fan community over at Dothraki.org, and they have a forum, where people can ask questions about stuff. But they've also put up a wiki where they've tried to collect kind of everything about Dothraki. There's a pretty large dictionary there. And then there's also like just sections on grammar, how to conjugate verbs, how to decline nouns. And they've also started putting together a few, they're putting together a few exercises. If you go to YouTube and you type in Dothraki tutorial, there's a guy, I have no idea who this guy is, but he has created 3 tutorials on Dothraki, and they're all good. There's the very last one. He made one slight mistake in misinterpreting what the root was, and it makes sense. If you know Dothraki, it makes sense. The error it was made. It's no big deal. But his little videos, I think, are some of the best I've seen. They're very straightforward, to the point, and just kind of like white text on a blue background. So you can look at that. And then also I have a blog, Dothraki.com, where I kind of just go over just points of grammar, or kind of look at fun stuff that people in the community are doing. Like I sponsored a miniature haiku Dothraki writing contest just a couple weeks ago. And they put together some fun haiku in Dothraki. This is all based on a radio interview I did in South Africa, where they asked me, and I only had like 3 minutes to do this. They first asked me, "Can you write a haiku in English?" Because our topic today is haikus. And so, okay, I thought that was a little strange. I asked if they wanted Dothraki or English, and he said English. And so, I wrote one. I'll write a haiku. Then he calls back like 3 minutes before the interview is supposed to go live. And he says, "Oh, actually, I made a mistake. We want it in Dothraki. Do you think you could do that?" And so I put together a Dothraki haiku in like 3 minutes before I got a phone call and I had to do the interview. And so I thought, it's a pretty easy form. And so they kind of had fun creating Dothraki haiku. Anyway, so, we do kind of fun stuff like that.
It's good to know there's Dothraki poetry.
Yeah. I suppose there should be.
Well, David, thank you so much for being on the show. This was so much fun. This was an absolute blast talking to you, and this is, I think, something that people watch the show, and maybe even if they don't know, they're appreciating. It's that attention to detail that made that show such a phenomenon and so good, and I think is why people are so excited about season 2. Do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Just one thing I would like to plug. First, I am going to be attending the Southwest Texas American and Popular Cultural 33rd annual conference. It's being held in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'm giving a talk during the conference, but I'm also giving a talk on February 10th that's going to be open to the public, kind of on Dothraki, and I'm going to talk about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that I did while I was working on the show and introduce the language a little bit. And we're also going to air an episode from season 1 of Game of Thrones. And it's going to be $10, but all the proceeds go to the local branch of the American Cancer Society.
That sounds great. I'd love to go hear about those things. Thank you again so much for being on the show, Dave. This was great.
All right.
Can you do those plugs again in Dothraki?
Give me a week and I'll do it.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, I know why everyone's still listening to the show, and it's not to find out what my Twitter account is. You guys want to know about that fake language from Land of the Lost. Did some research, of course. There are 2 versions of Land of the Lost. The original one is from the mid-70s, and the remake was from the early 90s. The language, Paku, which David talked about, was from the original version of the show, and it was spoken by the caveman-like Pakuni, not the reptilian Sleestack, as I had suggested. Glad we got to the bottom of that. I tried to figure out if they also used the language in the 90s version of the show. Couldn't come up with anything, but I did find an article about the big-budget Land of the Lost movie that came out and bombed a few years ago starring Will Ferrell. In that movie, Yorma, from The Lonely Island from Saturday Night Live, played Chaka, the main Pakuni. And, according to this article, Yorma, quote, learned the 300-odd words and speaks them, although the script calls for him to only grunt or gibber. Yorma said that even though the character Anna, who I guess is some sort of translator, translated most of his dialogue, that he would, quote, go back to the Pakuni dictionary and make up sentences that go with her translations. What Anna translates is much more eloquent than what I am saying, but I am definitely trying to speak it correctly. And in the article, Yorma then jokes that he went to all that trouble for, quote, the 5 people out there who will notice. This was before the movie came out, before Yorma knew that only 5 people were going to see the movie total. Somewhat tragic, but an interesting history of another created language. Guys, thank you so much for listening to Jeff Rubin Show. As you can see from this episode, pays. You want your phrases translated to Dothraki? It pays to follow me on Twitter and on Facebook. On Twitter, it's at Jeff Rubin Show. There's a Facebook fan page. There's youtube.com/Jeff Rubin. There's Tumblr, jeffrubin.com. Sometimes over the weekends, as I'm putting these episodes together, for 30 minutes or so, will put up a preview episode of next week's episode. So definitely go to all those things and spend your life listening to me. Thank you. I'm going to stop talking. Bye.